Hello, everyone. Welcome to another FENS webinar. My name is Daniel Wójcik. I work at the Nęcki Institute of Experimental Biology in Warsaw, Poland. I am also a member of the FENS Committee for Higher Education and Training. Today, I will be chairing the webinar, Empowering Future Neuroscience with Modern Computing Paradigms, the Training Perspective. Our agenda is we will start with Ashley Chavinet, who will tell us about why and how we should teach neuroscience students how to code. Then we move to Germany, where Thomas Pachler will talk about boosting research skills with short courses for advanced training in neuroscience. Back to the United States, Megan Peters will talk about training the next generation of computational neuroscientists worldwide. And we end up with Mateusz Kostecki in Warsaw talking about bottom-up initiatives to train in computational and systems neuroscience. After those presentations, we will have a brief discussion and questions and answer sessions. The rules of the webinar are this: we will have no live questions during talks. If you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A box. If you ask a question, please let us know if you ask a specific speaker or everyone. If you wish to introduce yourself, you may use the chat window. And if you wish to ask a question live in the final part, please raise your hand. And now, without further ado, I did not share my presentation, I just realized. Without further ado, let me just give over to Ashley.
All right, hello, good morning from California. Good evening if you're in Europe, and thanks for having me today. So the title of my short talk this morning is Why and How We Should Teach Neuroscience Students How to Code. And so I'm gonna kick us off with a sort of slightly broader view of maybe where coding sits in neuroscience and where neuroscience is heading. And so I wanna kick us off with this video on the left. So this is a video maybe some of you have seen before. This is whole brain imaging in a larval zebrafish. And I love this video because it is one of the first times we've been able to image every single neuron in an animal simultaneously. And you can immediately appreciate by looking at this just how complex this problem of trying to make any sense of this is. It feels like palm reading if you're just staring at all of these neurons that are firing at these different patterns. And in addition, we know that there's more and more cell types in the brain. We're trying to figure out what each of them do. And this kind of complexity where we have all these simultaneously recorded neurons, as well as all of these different cell types, means that neuroscience data is really sort of getting harder and harder to wrangle and make sense of. And as some of you probably know as well, the number of neurons that we can record from is growing exponentially. And so here's a timeline of us moving from single neuron recording all the way up to calcium imaging, as I just showed you. And every 6 and so years, the number of neurons we can record from is doubling. And so we have bigger and bigger data sets as a result. And just to kind of drill home this point that neuroscience is getting bigger, if you take a mouse brain, for example, and you assume that you have 1,000 connections for each neuron, you would get a connection matrix that has 10 to the 11th entries, or a few hundred gigabytes of data. If you image those same pixels at a reasonable resolution, you get 500 petabytes of data. And if you record from each one at about 1,000 hertz, you get 500 petabytes of data. And so neuroscience is just getting bigger the more and more data we collect. And finally, we need some computational and theoretical frameworks to make sense of it. And so here's a quote from Christoph Koch in 2013, where he says that in 2013, we know that there's a C. elegans with 302 nerve cells, but even this is beyond the ability of computational neuroscience to comprehend. And I think this is really still true even in 2022. And so to summarize, I think neurobiology students need to code for a few different reasons: to wrangle large data sets, to do computational modeling of these complex data sets. But in addition, if you walk into most neuroscience labs, you'll find that they're doing custom data acquisition with boards like the one you see on the upper left-hand side here. So they're programming different things to have mice go left or right or turn on lights, whatever it might be. And so in order to do that, you also need to learn how to code. And then finally, as is I think implicit in the first two, you need statistics, data analysis, and visualization. And knowing how to code will help you with all of those things. And so the point I'd like to make is that the next generation of neuroscientists needs new skills to adapt to this changing landscape of data. And I'm not the first person to say this. So a few years ago, Terry Sinowski, Pat Churchland, and Tony Mavshin said, we need to cultivate a new generation of computationally trained researchers who are aware of the richness of data. The BRAIN Initiative also really strongly focuses on quantitative training, so exposing neuroscientists to statistics and computation, as well as the other way around, so exposing those who are really familiar with computation with biological questions. And then finally, this paper from Bill Grisham talks about training a workforce that can handle, curate, and utilize large-scale data. Otherwise, the potential of these data will go unmet. And I think that's really the situation we're in now, where we have amazing data sets, but we need people with the skills to make some sense of them. And so even still, even though there's this really clear need, there's only a few neuroscience programs that currently require coding. And so on the upper right-hand side here, you see a pie graph of undergraduate programs, and only about 6 of 118 undergraduate neuroscience majors required coding as of 2017, and only 9 included it as an elective. Even if you look at PhD programs, and I know that we have some PhD students here, and you think about, if they require a program or include it as an elective, it's still not even close to all of the programs, only about half even included as an elective in that curriculum. And so I think something we can do is we can integrate coding into our undergraduate as well as our graduate coursework. But we need to think carefully about how, and we need to think carefully about some of the barriers that we might encounter when we go to bring coding in. And the first barrier might be ease of access to coding environments. And so this might have been a barrier 10 years ago, but these days, this is actually not so much of a problem. And so at UCSD, for example, we have what's called a Jupyter Hub, where every student can log in and get into a coding environment just with an internet connection. Google Colab works for that exceptionally well as well. And you'll hear from Megan Peters in just a few minutes about how NMA has been using Google Colab too. And so in my class, I teach a neurobiology lab class as well as a few other things. We set up Jupyter notebooks for students to log in and code in. And the really nice thing, again, is that students don't have to install anything. They don't have to pay anything. It's totally free and just there for them. So in these notebooks, they can do things like work with data from the Allen Institute, do some simple statistics, and maybe even look for differences between different cell types using that data. The nice thing about these notebooks too is that you can design them with straightforward tasks, and you can kind of titrate the amount of coding you'd like someone to do. And so in this example, for someone, they're just plugging in the names of different Cree lines. And so it's a very, very simple coding task. But for new coders, this immediately shows them what code looks like and gives them access to a coding environment. And so this first barrier in 2022, not so bad. With a little bit of know-how, we can get around this. The second barrier, though, is biology instructor knowledge of coding. And so something that we need to think about is if we want to teach more coding, we need people who can teach coding. And so a few years ago, I ran a survey and I asked current neuroscientists at different levels, graduate students, postdocs, faculty, et cetera, when they learned how to code or if they took a coding class. And so in this chart here, you can see the percent who took a coding class at each stage. And if you look at faculty, you'll notice that about a third of them took a class at some point. And that is not so many faculty if we need a lot of people to teach coding or at least integrate a little bit of coding into their class. If you ask them how they feel about coding, they're also not super comfortable with it. So this is neuroscience faculty and biology faculty, and only about a third of them are saying they're either comfortable or extremely comfortable. And presumably that's how much you'd want to be if you're actually going to teach a class, right? So we have a real barrier here in terms of who can actually teach coding. There's also a barrier with trying to figure out what are the needs of applied versus basic programming courses. And this is something I think about on a regular basis because I'm trying to figure out, do my students need to know, all of the back-end information that a computer scientist might need to know, or do they simply know how to do a blast query at the command line? And I think those are two very different things. So we need to think really carefully about what we're showing students and what really matters. And thinking of those students, they also come into our classes with different perceptions of coding. And maybe some of you can relate to this as well. And so we have this sort of perception of coding and computer science in our society as being a few different things. They might be singularly focused people. They might be asocial. They might be competitive or male, right? And all of these things sort of build up into this stereotype that we have of a coder, at least in the US. And essentially, it's this character from Big Bang Theory, right? This kind of doesn't really talk to anybody, is male, et cetera. So this is a real problem when we're trying to invite more and more students into these computational paths. And I've asked my own students about this as well. And so here's a few quotes from some of my students. So I have computer science buddies who share their stresses to me. I've heard really awful things about computer science courses. Numbers stress me out. And some people also pretty curious. And with my students, I find that they're very curious, even if they're sort of a little bit anxious about it as well. And so finally, the thing that I'm trying to do then as an educator at UCSD is to create accessible, discipline-specific coding resources that all educators can use regardless of their coding background. And these resources come in a few different forms. So they come in individual lesson plans, and that's what you see on the right-hand side here. So these are prepackaged Jupyter notebooks and slides that educators can pick up and hopefully run with. They come in the form of introductory coding classes for biology majors. And finally, they come in the form of more advanced coding classes or even workshops. And so I think that these kinds of contextualized coding experiences can really be inviting to more and more students. This is a study from a class that's taught at Harvey Mudd. So at Harvey Mudd, everybody takes a coding class, and they have this version of the coding class that's coding in biology. So that's CS1B that you see here. And so you can appreciate in this chart that over the years, more students that identify as female have been enrolling in CS1B. And so it's clearly inviting more students into the fold. And so I'm trying to do the same thing here at UCSD. I teach a Intro to Python for Biologists course with the idea that maybe it'll attract more students than those that would have gone into our CS major, for example. In addition, I teach a neural data science class, which has been really, really fun. So this is a class where students can actually start to work with big data. All these notebooks are online and available if anybody wants to play with them as well. And Brad Wojtek and I, who helped design this class, are also writing a textbook currently to put some of this into a book, as well as a big open access website so that folks can play with some of these different pipelines. And so I want to point out to you, if you don't know, and you're here as a trainee, that there are so many open neuroscience data sets. And I curate a spreadsheet of these. You'll find these all across the internet. I know that if you get involved in like Neuromatch Academy, you'll learn about a ton more too. But there's a lot of data out there that you can play with. And so if you're trying to just get your sort of feet wet in this, that's a great way to get started. And so I wanted to just to end here on sort of thinking about how we should teach coding, especially to those of you who are maybe starting to teach coding. Something that's really important is to emphasize to students that there's no programming gene. We need to frame coding as a skill. And the thing that I say to my students, many of whom come from backgrounds where they have a second language, is that it's like learning a language. And that's really, really true. So another way to say this is we're going to encourage growth mindsets around coding. And there's a ton of evidence. Oops. There's a link on my slide. That's hilarious. Let me get back to that. There's a ton of evidence actually that students with growth mindsets perform better over time. And these beliefs about whether computational abilities are fixed or malleable impact a ton of different things like sense of belonging, how students respond to difficulties, and ultimately their achievement. So this is really, really important, especially for new students. And finally, if you're in an environment where you can encourage pair programming, this is also something that has been shown to be extremely effective with new coders and people that are just getting started. And so finally, just a few things I think we should teach and learn as I'm thinking about developing these classes. I think it's really tempting to teach a ton of syntax and to really focus on that. But the thing that we try to focus in my classes is thought process and code design. And so we do a lot of pseudo coding, as you see on the right-hand side here. So not even at a computer, we're just kind of jotting things down on a board. We need to think more about goals and needs. So thinking back to those goals of the field, like what does the field need in order to deal with this data, and minimal dealing with specific software, but more focused on what is the goal of using that software. And finally, as something that I think the pandemic has really laid bare, we need people who can think really critically about data. And that's something that I'm thinking about in a lot of these courses. There's a few courses, or a few questions rather, that I still have as an educator that I'd love to learn from the other folks here today. And one of them is about how much math students need in order to do these kinds of analyses. I think that this is a big open question about, do we do like all of the math we possibly could and then start talking about data analysis, or when do we get it? And finally, breadth versus depth, right? There's always a question of, do we learn all of the different tools that we have, or do we dig into one and really learn how that one works? And so with that, I'll just close here. There's a bunch of people that I work with who have been really, really great, including the Allen Institute for sharing their data, student Austin, who's working with me on trying to understand how our students think about coding. And finally, if you're new to the field and you're just getting started, I wrote a book. It's called So You Want to Be a Neuroscientist, and there's hopefully some good advice in there about getting started in our field. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Ashley. So let me just remind everyone that if you guys want to ask questions, you can use the question and answer box to type it now, and then we will have a live discussion. And now it's over to you, Thomas.
Yeah, thanks very much, Daniel. Yeah, I'm Thomas Wachtler. I'm at the LMU in Munich and head of the German Neuroinformatics node. And I would like to share with you a couple of experiences we had over the past years. We're doing training in short courses in the field of computational neuroscience and neuroinformatics. And to give you a little bit of a background, I would like to introduce two organizations that are sort of in the context of what we've been doing. One is the ICF, the International Neuroinformatics Coordinating Facility. It's an organization to coordinate and foster neuroinformatics developments at a global scale. It has been established in 2005 and has been from the beginning also had a great interest in fostering training in the field of neuroinformatics, neuroscience, computer-driven neuroscience, computational neuroscience. At the moment, one of the features that INCF is providing for training is the Icf Training Space. That's a portal, a platform where INCF is collecting and organizing training resources for neuroscience, neuroinformatics, for open science. That's a good place to go to find specific resources for specific topics that you would like to learn about. The other organization I would like to mention, and in the context of which we've been working, is the Bernstein Network for Computational Neuroscience. This is a network of researchers, or emerged from a network of researchers that was coming together based on a funding program by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research in Germany, who has been funding for over more than 10 years computational neuroscience, specifically with the focus of fostering the collaboration between theorists and experimentalists. So this has led to this big German-wide network, and the field of this network has undergone a little bit of a transition. It's been widening. The membership is now much wider. So it's essentially an international organization where anyone who's interested in computational neuroscience can join. It's one of the main activities it's doing is hosting the Bernstein conference, which is a large conference on computational neuroscience. So this funding scheme of the Federal Ministry for Education and Research encompasses not only research funding, but also funding for infrastructural elements that would support and foster computational neuroscience. And one of these components was the German Neuroinformatics node, which is a project specifically funded to develop and provide infrastructure services, standards, tools for neuroscientists to facilitate the collaboration between researchers and also specifically to foster the development of computer-driven tools and methods for research, for neuroscience research. In computational neuroscience here is meant in a broad sense, which also includes of course, experimentalists that work on essentially computational questions of the brain. And specifically because in Germany there's a large electrophysiology community, the focus here was on cellular and systems neurophysiology. So in the context of that, and with the funding that came with that, we've been also trying to help training for the needs of the community of this computational neuroscience community. And the typical situation that labs encounter, or students encountered when they, for example, started their PhD in such a lab, coming, say, from biology, is that, so they started to do experiments, and then they were faced with the task of also analyzing the data. And in many labs, there might be specific tools or specific methods that are employed by the members of the lab, but the students nevertheless had to understand these methods and had to employ them, and that is very hard or can be very hard from students coming from biology field, where as Ashley already pointed out, where training in math and also in computer skills is basically not present. So the aim that we had back then was to develop training courses that would fill these gaps essentially, and at the same point, of course, have a maximal benefit for the students taking them. So and this led to essentially 3 course formats that we've been developing. 2 on neural data analysis, one short basic course and one advanced course, and also a course series on advanced scientific programming in Python. And I'm going to briefly introduce these courses. So the first course we developed was the short course on data analysis, which was specifically trying to target the students that come with a biology background, are maybe at the first year of their PhD, or maybe at even in their masters, and working on experimental neuroscience question, neurophysiology question, but having little training in mathematical skills and in computer skills. So the idea was to provide for them a short course. It was 1 week, and with specific or different methods being taught in a very accessible way. So the idea was to have independent training modules that we could then also combine in different courses, depending on the availability of the speakers, which made it easier to organize the courses if you have a pool of potential topics and speakers that you can draw from. And one of the main points that we wanted to make with this course, or the main features, was that this was not just a teaching and then you do maybe some exercises with predefined questions and stuff, but the idea was that the students actually wrote code to do the analysis, to do the data analysis. So they were tasked to implement the main part of the analysis of the method that was taught, and that was for these students, most of them, as I mentioned, coming from a biology background, was quite a challenge. But we had, of course, we were trying to foster that and that they would actually work with the code. And it was from the feedback that we got was a very good experience for them all to actually being able to recognize that they could actually do something with code. Yes, we noticed that a lot of there was a lot of reluctance first to really touch code. But these courses help them to basically overcome that and to see, yeah, there is something I can achieve in the context of the actual method that they were interested in learning about. So the idea was here again to give a hands-on training with very real data and real analysis that we're taking from the actual research of the trainers. And after a couple of years, we realized the community needs a bit more, not just this very basic training, but also training in more advanced topics. And that led then to the advanced course in neural data analysis, the ANDA course, which followed more or less the same sort of basic ideas, but was much longer, was 2.5 weeks, also very intense and involved not only the teaching of methods and exercises, but also part 1.5 weeks actually, where the students would work on sets of data that they got provided and could essentially, so real data, real recorded data that have been recorded in an actual neurophysiology lab, and could actually ask or formulate their own questions that they would like to ask about this data. And we also had a sort of a challenge, a question that was posed about this data that the students were asked to figure out based on the methods that had been taught. So that was a little bit of a competition there as well, and this essentially help the students to really focus on these methods and work hard to solve the challenge, and also to answer questions that they had about the data. So these were courses. Oh yeah, and here we also introduced a module on best practices in research data and reproducibility. So we also talked and discussed about tools and standards in the field, specifically for electrophysiology analysis, reproducibility, open science, all these concepts. So that's also good. These kind of training courses where the students come because they are interested. The main interest is, of course, to learn about methods that help them in their research. But you can use these kinds of venues to also bring about important concepts that become more and more important as the data become more complex and as openness is becoming much more in the focus. And so the third course I want to briefly introduce is the Advanced Scientific Programming in Python course. This is a course that's focusing on programming techniques. So it's not a course to learn Python. The idea here is that students who take this course have already a basic programming knowledge. It doesn't have to be Python, can be any programming language. But the idea is here to teach specific skills and specific techniques that help in writing good code, in writing maintainable code, writing code together, and so forth, in order to make it easier to use programming, to use programs, to use software for their research. So this is specifically tailored to scientists, which is, so it's not, it doesn't. It also covers, for example, data visualization and specific methods for analysis and so forth. And here the concept was that this wouldn't be always the same venue. The other courses we had mainly in venues that we had designed here, and this was an idea by Tiziana Zito, who actually came up with the concept of this course. The course is actually heavily inspired by software carpentry courses. And another idea was that this course would actually go to, just like software carpentry does, would go to the places where there are people who are interested. And so this course is held at a different place every time. The requirement is, of course, that there are local organizers who take care of the local organization, so that the workload essentially is shared. That those who benefit from it also, put in some effort to come up with this course. Yeah, one important thing here maybe is that there is course, another installment of the course is going to be run in a couple of months, and the deadline for application is, I think, the 1st of May. So go to this website to sign up and to apply for the course if you're interested in learning about programming practices that will help in your research. So to summarize, we're trying to provide some training courses to close gaps that we see, namely specifically these computer-based research skills that are important for research, for doing research in our more and more data focused research. We've been trying to devise concepts that are flexible and also cost efficient. We've been training a couple of hundred students for the past years. And one thing that I find important is that it's not only the actual knowledge and methods that the students take from these courses. There's also a lot of other benefits. For example, and one of the main benefits I found from our data analysis course is that the students are really motivated to start working with the code, as Ashley also pointed out. This important skill that or important notion that you should try to do it and not be scared away because it's code. Also, such courses are promoting collaboration among students and, of course, teaching best practices. Thank you very much.
Thomas, thank you so much. So now we move from Europe to California, and we will move to a very different scale of training. So Megan, it's over to you.
Great, thank you very much. So it's really my pleasure to be here today. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm really excited to talk to you all about Neuromatch Academy, which is, as Daniel said, a very different scale of training here, and I'm hoping that a lot of you may be interested in joining us this year. So I'm here to talk about a worldwide online summer school called Neuromatch Academy. So just to begin, to give you an overview of what Neuromatch is doing beyond the Academy, I wanted to point out that Neuromatch is actually an organization that has two branches. It has the Academy, which I'll talk about today, and it also has a conference, which is also online and also accessible from your living room. And the mission of all of the activities that Neuromatch is engaged in is to foster inclusive interactions for sharing and learning and mentorship and networking and professional development, currently centered on computational neuroscience and a lot of the topics that both Thomas and Ashley have been talking about today. And so the vision and ethics of our entire program is basically to use algorithmic matchmaking to help people meet one another across geopolitical and time zone and language borders so that we can all build this inclusive computational neuroscience and related disciplines community. And that with the Academy, what we are really interested in doing is being focused on teaching and communicating in collaborative ways. And so we're really trying to find ways to provide quality education that will guide the students through the materials instead of kind of teaching at them, so that you can learn and explore on your own. You can collaborate to collectively solve problems. And our suite of virtual activities, especially now as we're coming out of COVID, we want to stay virtual because this really reduces our carbon footprint. So this is really great for the climate, reduces the carbon emissions that are necessary by really eliminating the need to travel to participate in this global computational neuroscience community. And another thing that being virtual really allows us to do is really strive for radical inclusion. So regardless of your financial resources, your current position as an undergraduate, all the way through to faculty or industry professional, regardless of your orientation, your gender identity, your learning differences, your geopolitical borders that you might feel hemmed in with, we are able to try to break down all of these barriers so that we can include basically everybody worldwide. And so to accomplish this, we are using and developing innovative technologies and platforms for delivering computational neuroscience education and community development. Some of these technologies don't really quite exist yet, and so we're working on building them. So this is also a little bit of a pitch to say, if you think that this sounds exciting, that there's a community of 500 volunteer organizers that are part of building Neuromatch. And so I hope maybe you'll come join us, and there'll be a link to do that at the end. So through both the conference and the academy, which is again what I'm going to focus on today, we're aiming to enable the future of neuroscience and computational neuroscience and related disciplines in all aspects. So I just wanted to point out how much of a global movement Neuromatch has become since March 2020, right before the pandemic, when a few folks got together and thought, maybe an online computational neuroscience conference isn't such a bad idea. And then, of course, we went through lockdown and we held another conference, and then we decided, well, we're getting a little big here. We should probably incorporate and build our own infrastructure. And then we held our first summer school in July of 2020. Then we held another online conference. And then this past summer, we actually ran serial courses in computational neuroscience and deep learning, and then another conference. And so throughout this just about 2-year history now, we've got over 500 volunteers and organizers. We've got over 400 teaching assistants, and we've reached over 5,000 interactive students and 10,000 conference registrants in over 100 countries around the world. And we also have instructional support in over 13 languages. So this is a big project, and we kind of need everyone's support. I hope that this will help you get excited about what we're doing here. So I'll give you just a little bit of a taste of what Neuromatch Academy is doing, but I'll also point out that we've also written this article last year that contains a lot of this information as well. So Neuromatch Academy is a massive global online summer school that runs 2 intensive 3-week courses in computational neuroscience and in deep learning. We have over the past 2 years, we've had over 5,000 interactive track students, as I mentioned, from over 100 countries and regions. And we support this student body with a team of over 500 volunteers. And these volunteers include everybody from faculty to professionals to trainees and undergraduates, also from all over the world. And the idea here is that these volunteers are then part of this global community as well, so we can help these volunteers and the younger trainees grow into being leaders in the field of computational neuroscience. And then structurally, we are leading these courses in highly innovative and interactive formats that include these pre-recorded videos by some of the top experts in the world, interleaved with hands-on coding exercises. So we heard about the importance of coding from the previous 2 speakers. And so this is a huge core of what Neuromatch Academy does. And all the code is all live online, so you guys can actually go to the website right now and start playing with it. You can break it, you can fix it, you can steal it and use it in your own research. And so this content is delivered to small groups of students, which we call pods, which are about 10 students to 1 trained teaching assistant. And we match them together algorithmically. Everyone meets on Zoom to go through the materials live together. And the materials for the 2 courses that we run right now are highly curated to not just teach the most foundational and up-to-date content in these two fields, which is really important, but to try to do so in these structured curricula that are supported by these conceptual links across days. So it feels very coherent. And at the core of both of these curricula is an emphasis on what we're calling the meta modeling process, which is the idea of saying which tool from all of the tools that we're going to introduce you to over the 3 weeks that you go through this course, which tool is the right one for the job. And so this means that we're trying to get students to see all the tools that are available, but then ask, what is the question that you really want to be asking and answering with these toolkits? And then you should go and pick a tool or an approach that's the right tool for the job, that's going to actually answer the question that you're interested in. And instead of, just blindly throwing deep learning at everything. And that's an inside joke for any NMA students in the audience. So it's both what our curriculum contains, and it's also how we deliver it that we think is trying to change the face of how neuroscience education is done worldwide. And so what that looks like is these platforms that we're building. So we need to both make sure the materials are top-notch, and we need to pay very close attention to being able to deliver it worldwide in a way that's really effective and engaging. So, you can't just write some code and then stick it on a website somewhere and then kind of hope that people will discover it and figure it out on their own. So, Ashley mentioned pair programming as one of the most important ways that we can get people engaged in learning how to program within neuroscience. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do here. So the first part of this platform is, of course, the content itself. So for both of our deep learning and computational neuroscience courses, this is built collaboratively. It's crowdsourced from many brilliant humans around the world with world-class experts in these topics building the materials. It features active coding exercises front and center. This includes group projects with real data sets so you can really get your hands dirty and dig in. And our materials are also closed captioned in 3 languages to be really learner-centered. And all of the materials, of course, extensively tested. They're thoroughly vetted in a polishing, or what we call waxing, procedure to make sure the code runs seamlessly and integrates well with the entire curriculum. And then, of course, finally, everything is licensed open access, CC BY. Anybody can use it, steal it, do whatever you want with it, as long as you don't provide attribution. And then to best deliver these materials to learners, we want to create these personalized learning environments within the global community. So we're making small groups of about 10 students with 1 TA, and we use matching algorithms to match students based on interests and time zone and language and all sorts of other stuff. So language is one of the things that we use to match students together. So if we have a teaching assistant who can speak the language that you prefer to engage in discussions in, we can actually try to form pods where discussions will take place in Spanish or Mandarin or Farsi, even if the main teaching materials are presented in English. And we also try to engage students in building relationships with their pod mates. So Ashley again mentioned pair programming, and we want to help students build friendships so they're going to engage in that more actively. So to help with this, we give our pods cute little names, and the students really get engaged in building pod logos to go with their pod names. And then we also provide professional development seminars in addition to the course materials. So if you want to talk about how to get into grad school or how to use open science framework or hear about careers in industry, then these sessions are available. And then all of this is facilitated by teaching assistants who we train to guide students effectively through the tutorials, so that even if those TAs didn't develop the teaching materials themselves, we can help support them in supporting the students in finding their own answers. And then the final piece of the puzzle is the accessibility, equity, and inclusion aspect. So all of our classes are online. This means that we can connect people over 100 countries and regions without incurring much of a carbon footprint at all. As I mentioned, we can facilitate students gaining access to instructional support in their preferred language. And we can ensure that our student body is diverse across every facet possible, including both gender parity and sexual orientation, and equal access to technology stacks across regional and geopolitical divides. So some services don't work in some countries. You just can't get access. So we're going to find alternatives, and we're going to mirror our entire tech stack so that everyone can get access. And to do this, we've even worked with the United States government, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, so that we can receive a license to operate within Iran. And so even that notable barrier that everybody knows about is one that we are not satisfied to just sit behind, and we're going to push through. So through these activities, we're really trying to leverage technology to scale, reaching literally thousands of students around the world in service of this core goal, which is to democratize science and high quality transformative science education. So even after COVID, even after the excellent in-person summer schools return, which are so important for training and community building, we still want to ensure that everybody around the world can get access to these materials and training opportunities. So of course, none of this is going to be possible without the generous support of any of our sponsors. So I want to put this up and say thank you very much to everybody who has supported this initiative. Deep, deep gratitude to everybody here. And that's it. So the registration is open now. The course fees are low, and they're scaled with the cost of living in your country or your region. And if you can't pay, if you don't have a supervisor to pay on your behalf, then we can also waive that fee if it's really, truly impossible for you to pay. So come and check out the applications at this website here, portal.neuromatch.io. And if you're interested in volunteering, helping build graphics, helping build captions, helping do video editing, all sorts of interesting stuff, you can also volunteer to be a part of the Neuromatch family. So thanks very much.
Again, thank you so much. That was really exciting. So let's move to the final presentation of Mateusz Kostecki. There we are.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
That's perfect. Okay, and then yes, here we go. Okay, so my name is Mateusz Kostecki, and I am PhD student at Nensky Institute. And today I would like to tell you about the bottom-up approach to training in computational and systems neuroscience, and especially about our Nensky Openlab project that we are organizing since 2010. And it's a project organized fully by PhD students at Nensky and a few other institutions, depending on the project actually that we are realizing. So what is Nensky Openlab project? It's a project where we organize workshops, courses, summer schools, and symposia, and all of them, more or less all of them, are related to teaching people programming, electronics, optics, and other open science tools to foster the research. And I would like to tell you, how did we develop our project? How are we conducting it? What are our ideals? What are our goals? And I hope to inspire those of you who are PhD students to organize similar things that are not that easy to organize, and that help you to organize training in your home institutions if this training is not fully available. So what were our premises? So our most important premise is that neuroscience needs the ideas, as Ashley showed in her talk, that we are overwhelmed with data. It's almost a cliche to say that we have too much data and we don't have enough understanding. So we think that we need new theories, new ideas that would help us to understand what brain does. And our next premise is that ideas need freedom to develop. Without freedom, there is no space for us to think about theories and ideas. And what is freedom? What do I mean by freedom? By freedom, I mean mostly access to resources. So when we have access to resources, when we can freely conduct experiments, like we can conduct any experiment we want to, we can ask important questions and then answer them. Then we have this freedom, time to think more broadly about what our research means. The problem is, of course, that this freedom is not equally distributed and is not accessible everywhere. We know, especially, that labs in richer countries have access to resources and time, and the problem is that the countries from periphery, like Poland and other countries, are very much restricted in that regard. But we also believe that really interesting ideas come from peripheries. I believe that people who are kind of outside of a mainstream may contribute a lot development of ideas and theories. So the problem is that those people very often don't have access to tools that would allow them to ask questions and ask important questions and work on the projects that they would like to work on. So we aim in NSK Openlab project, we aim at giving scientists skills, tools, and knowledge to allow them to ask those questions and to develop their ideas freely without the need of thinking about the limitations of funding or limitations of technical tools that they have. So we focus especially on open science tools that are basically freely available. We focus on teaching people programming and using computational methods to analyze their data, because we believe that with those tools, they can extract much more information from the experiment they are conducting, even if they are limited by resources. So how do we do that? How did we start doing that? So first of all, I had the idea for going in that direction, organizing this kind of project many years ago, 4 years ago, more or less, but I didn't have any resources to start with. I asked my institute to provide me with some money to organize some programming workshop. They said no, so I did what I could. So I knew that I can program Arduino, for example, and I could maybe organize a workshop. So I just took the equipment I had at home. I used my personal equipment and I started conducting workshops just with whatever I had. And it's a very important thing to do. If you want to start something, just start with whatever you have at hand, because it's like the best starting point you can achieve. So I just conducted 3 or 4 workshops where I try to encourage people and show them that programming is easy. And I really believe that teaching people Arduino is the best way to start, because they can see that the program they're writing has this like physical implementation. They can see that diode is blinking. And my aim was to show people that it's nothing hard to do, that everybody can start programming and use it in the lab, because most of us work on neuroscience. Like my colleagues work in behavioral neuroscience, and Arduino is extremely useful there, because you can design your behavioral paradigm, control optogenetic equipment, and acquire data. So that's what I wanted to show them, that programming is easy and they can really build something that is useful with very restricted resources. And after those few workshops that we conducted, we became kind of recognizable. So people started to know, okay, there are those people who are organizing workshops. And we finally asked for the funding once again, and we finally got a positive answer. And when we had this like small budget, we started to invite people from outside of the institute. We organized some bonsai workshops with Nacho Sanguinetti from Bernstein. He's now at Harvard, and he came. We had enough money to invite him and to conduct some workshops about bonsai programming language. It's a language used for designing and conducting and analyzing data from behavioral experiments. And thanks to those workshops, actually bonsai became popular in our institute and other institutes in Poland. And we were able to popularize this tool that is open and it's free, and it's a great tool that is actually makes all the like many commercially accessible softwares unnecessary. And then we seized all opportunities we had. So for example, in 2018, I learned there's a new method for tracking body parts of an animal called DeepLabCat based on neural network. And I wrote to Alexander Mattis, who is an author of this method. And fortunately, he was in Europe at this point, because he was working at Harvard in 2018. He was working in Europe, so he was for some time in Europe. So it was very easy to invite him and for him to come. And we conducted actually the second probably workshop on DeepLabCat that happened. And it was actually very nice workshop. And people now are using it widely, and we conducted much more workshops later on. And people who were participants on that workshop also conducted their own workshops in their institutions. And now we know that there are like at least 40 people using DeepLabCat in Poland. And this is the next tool that we were able to popularize. And then we also engage all the people we know. Everybody knows some people from summer schools, conferences, and other events. So we invited our friends from UCL, from Friedrich Mischer Institute, and we conducted electrophysiology and optogenetic workshops at our institute that gave people like more in-depth knowledge about how the equipment works, because we are really believing this unblack boxing idea, so that people will know how exactly the equipment works. So it's no longer just a black box that is just used by connecting some cables and switching buttons. And then after like a year or two, we felt that our initiative is getting robust. This is this quote from Florian Albino that I really like, that good initiatives, and we believe that it's a good initiative, grow robust in time. So starting from like those basic workshops that we organized with equipment we had at home, we really started to feel that the organization is getting more and more popular, that our workshops are becoming popular, and we had more and more people engaged in organizing those workshops. So then we decided that we should expand at this point, and in 2019, we organized our first summer school. It was a school on behavioral neuroscience. It was really like we had a very limited budget, but what we managed to do was to basically invite people to a small place in the middle of the forest. We taught them electronics, we taught them 3D printing, and then we taught them Arduino. We built robots with Arduino, and we taught them how to program those robots, and then we used those robots in behavioral experiments, so-called, and then we used Bonsai to conduct those experiments, gather the data, and then we taught them how to use Python to analyze the behavioral data. So we did it with very limited funding, but the fun was great, and the course was extremely intense. It was only 8 days, so we worked from morning till the late night sometimes. And we had participants from Denmark, from Germany, and from Italy. So it was like our first more or less international event. And then what happened? Then pandemic started, of course, at some point. But before that, we managed to organize more than 20 workshops, a summer school. Recently, we also organized a Python course. And more than 200 people took part in our initiatives, workshops, and courses, and school. So at some point, we decided that, okay, we are giving people those tools, but our general aim, as I said at the beginning, was to as we believe that ideas are the most important part of doing science, we decided that we should start to also develop in this direction. So we started in 2020 during the pandemic. We joined forces with our colleagues from Argentina. And we decided to organize joint seminars. And for 1.5 years, we were organizing Transatlantic behavioral systems neuroscience seminars, where we invited people from systems neuroscience and computational neuroscience, and they gave talks, and we had very nice discussions for this time. It was the only thing actually we could been doing during the pandemic, but it was very enjoyable. And then we also proceeded to organizing symposia, where we could more talk about ideas, but we also were really eager to talk about ideas that are for example, on the border between neuroscience and computational neuroscience and AI. So that's why we, for example, organized this symposium about the concept of innateness in neuroscience, but also in AI. It was a very nice symposium that tried to combine those two perspectives and maybe find common ground. But currently what we are trying to do now, when we finally are more or less off with pandemic, let's hope so, is to combine those two perspectives. So this development of skills and giving people tools, teaching them how to program and use those different tools, with thinking about ideas and developing ideas and thinking more broadly about the research. So that's why we organized this school this year. So this is it will be also organized with our colleagues from Argentina, and it's called Transatlantic Behavioral Neuroscience Summer School. And the aim of the school is to invite participants to also, it's a small place in a secluded area in the middle of the forest at the river, and then we will teach them programming, basics of programming, using electronics, 3D printing, and then we will develop very simple behavioral paradigms for flies. We will record them, and then we will use Python, we will use DeepLabCat, Simba, and maybe other tools to analyze the data and show them that how can they easily build their own paradigms and then analyze the data, also using those open, freely available tools. But this is not only one part of the school. The second part of the school is the part where we invited lecturers, and we invited people who have very interesting perspectives of behavior, could try to put behavior and the brain in more broad perspectives about body and the environment and evolutionary aspect as well. And we'll organize talks, discussion, and debates so that people will also think about how to put the research they do using the tools that we will try to provide them within some broader frameworks. And applications are open. We extended the deadline, so applications are open until April 12th. So we encourage you to apply. We also encourage you, and would like to ask you to spread the news about the school. And the last project for this year is actually the school and course that is purely based on developing ideas. And it's actually a Nensky School of Ideas, where we invited people who develop theoretical frameworks for neuroscience. And we also invited philosophers of science and anthropologists to also show people the broader perspective of how science works. And there will be workshops about modeling, computational methods, and but also about evolutionary and developmental perspectives in neuroscience. So that is our goal. We hope that we will expand our project with every year. And this is our team. We are only like not that many PhD students from Nensky. You can visit our webpage, you can find us on Facebook and participate in our workshops. And if you would like to organize something like that in your institute, we'd be happy to help you. And thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Mateusz. I was also excited. So this finishes the first part of our meeting. We will now move into discussion. I wonder if you could stop sharing your screen.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. So we already have several questions. I'm very happy about this. We'll go into them in a minute. We have now had a more or less systematic presentation of training on several different levels. So we started with training at the university, going through small in-person courses to a massive online courses and some bottom-up initiatives that you can do if all else fails. So you know what strikes me is you know, when you look at, I don't know how physics operates, for instance, and I'm a physicist, so that's my perspective. You know, some things are taken for granted. Like you expect that everybody gets some basics of maths, you expect to get some basics of programming, you know, things like that. And here in biology, we are very far from this. And my feeling is that we are currently undergoing a paradigm shift, actually. So, you know, if I look at electrophysiology, for instance, you know, in the past, you could just take a single wire, put it in the brain, do a recording, and then maybe, you know, even with an Excel, you could do some analysis. And these days, you've got neuropixels and you just record, you know, thousands of cells simultaneously. It's just not a way to go. So, you know, my feeling is that in biology, we simply must accept that we have to change. And I think the question is, how do we go about this? Like we showed that we try to attack it from several different perspectives. But, and I mean, they are all complementary. So I think we should go those different ways. But when you think about the future sort of over the last couple of years, which way do you think we as a field sort of at the universal level, how we should go? I mean, do you think that, you know, we should have, I don't know, dedicated programs in biology or sort of interdisciplinary between biology and physics? Or is it just enough to have a course in programming? What's your feeling? If anybody wants to take it, just, you know, unmute your microphone and take it.
Maybe just one thought. I think we just need to probably recognize that we're going to change the way we're doing research, right? Not only, and it's on quantitative level, as you mentioned, the recording technology, you know, is so much changing, yeah. but also the attitude and the culture, right? We're talking much more about open science, and it's almost now. It's right. Almost. I mean, I remember, you know, when we started with with Icf, you know, and you mentioned it was a decade ago. You know, we were thinking about how can we get people to do open science and stuff. And now everybody's talking about it.
Exactly.
So that's really great. And I think that the problem is that, and I think I actually mentioned that also, the curricula are just lagging behind, and we need to try to establish that so that it becomes a natural thing, that computing skills is just something you have to learn as well, and it has to also start in schools. Not just at universities, and that's unfortunately a thing that's too slow. that right. We would like to have, but eventually it has to go there. And until we're there, we have to, you know, complement with other stuff.
I mean, I was particularly struck by what Ashley showed us about sort of problems of the faculty with the programming, because I mean, you know, they are the trainers, right? I mean, so essentially we need a generation of people who are feeling comfortable with, I mean, generally just computing paradigms. I mean, coding is sort of just the base, right? But I mean, the reproducibility, I mean, things like using GitHub or Jupyter Notebook, I mean, they are these days just the essence. So again, do you think that the Neuromatch Academy is going to achieve that?
Well, we're trying. Yeah, I think this is such a big part of the process, though, is just demystifying what it is to do computational neuroscience and to remove this kind of like magical mathematical programming barrier that really hides away a lot of the really interesting problems and interesting challenges from you know, like, and this is part of the culture that we need to change, not just in training and not just in education and not just even in open science, but in like publishing culture. So we need to have a way of deploying what you did to actually get the pretty figures that you put in a static PDF. And so I think we need to change the way that science is presented. And then in order to have a generation of people who can actually absorb and understand and participate in peer review for those types of things, we need to train a new generation of people who can actually read the code and read the math and not be like, well, I'll just skip that part and go to the pretty figure. And I'm certainly like guilty of this, you know, that earlier in my training it was like, oh, that's a math equation or that's like a programming block. We can skip that and come back to it. I'll just look at like kind of a summary statement. And I think we really need to move away from that, because this is the future. So we're trying to do that with NMA to fill the gaps until the rest of the formal curricula can catch up a little bit.
So just a question, I'm out of curiosity. You've trained so many people, but I wonder how many of them were actually faculty? Because I mean, I know that the youngsters, I mean, they have the lowest barrier to move into this type of things. What about the faculty?
That's a good question. I would have to go look up the exact numbers, so please don't
what roughly, if you have the idea?
Yeah, we had fewer than 100, I would say, faculty participate in as students. We definitely had faculty participate as faculty mentors to help guide the group projects.
Sure.
And so that at least exposes them to some of the methods that we're working on here. But yeah, I mean, this is available to faculty. I know that one of my graduate students was a TA and had faculty in his pod. And that was, you know, intimidating for him maybe a little bit to be like, I'm going to teach faculty how to do, you know, Bayes day or something like that, like to do, you know, Bayesian brain stuff. But it was, it's good to have it there. So if you don't have 3 weeks to do as faculty, to do the course as faculty, which who has 3 weeks to do that?
Tell me about it.
But the materials are there and you can use them in the classroom if you want to. So you can play with them on your own.
All right. Anybody wants to add? I mean,
I'll just add one thing. I mean, I think
yes,
that what you're pointing out and the fact that there's so few faculty taking advantage of like the amazing thing that is NMA, like points to this problem that we have where like faculty don't have the space to do their own skill development sometimes, right? And so if you give faculty like a little bit of space, maybe it's like teaching relief or a few weeks over the summer, even like, you know, whatever with a little bit of money, like we need to train people to teach these skills at university level and beyond, right? And this is something that people who teach high school have thought a lot about. And so there's more programs to train like middle school and high school teachers, for example, to do basic programming. But we like need that also at the university level to give people space to do their own professional development.
I mean, I think that in particular, the university heads, you know, deans and like that, they should realize that that's somewhere where you should put pressure and that should sort of affect the hiring decisions. I mean, that's my feeling. Anyway, guys, we have something like 10 plus minutes and we've got 7 interesting questions. So let's just take them like one by one, okay? I'm going to be asking them. If somebody wants to raise a hand, I'll try actually to be able to see that. So I'll just go by the simple ones. So can any of these courses mentioned by Thomas, can they be attended remotely? Thomas, tricky question.
Yeah, question, short answer is no. we had the ANDA course last year online.
Recordings? Recordings?
No recordings. Too much hassle. You know, all the GDPR stuff. We had the under recorded in-person under course recorded I think 2 years ago, and the recordings are available through Icf. But last year, you know, we had so much work to do to get it, you know, done online that we didn't want to take care of the recording at all. The thing is that it wasn't, we thought it wasn't, you know, it worked okay, but having experienced, you know, an in-person situation, in-person course, we as instructors were not really satisfied with. We just thought that, but the discussions and the interactions were not as, you know, as deep and as broad as they are. And if you are there for 1 or 2 weeks in at the same venue and you bump into each other and just so right. So we decided for this type of course, the overhead is too much, and okay. We will try to do it in person again. And the same goes for ASPP. They didn't even try. They took a break last year, and this year will be in person again.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. So I see that the FENS office would like to answer this, or is it answered? Okay, I got funny message on the Q&A question. Okay, there's a second question which I like a lot. I don't know if the person would like to ask it live. I don't see any hands, so maybe I'll just read it. I think all speakers so far have touched upon this, but the level depth to go to is difficult to pitch. Coding involves learning a new language, interaction with new platforms, Jupyter Git, open science routines, etc. Each of these aspects are off-putting to some students and staff, faculty. To interest students, you want to show immediate results of why this is useful first. Otherwise, the breadth to learn is too overwhelming. But for them to use it going forward, they need to know some of these other aspects. How do you introduce in a manner that doesn't overwhelm people so they use it going forward? Megan, please.
Yeah, I'll take this to begin with. So I think this is totally right, that this can be super overwhelming, and especially if you're kind of new to it. So we want to make sure that everyone has at least a little bit of a foundation, so they're not coming in completely blind. To do that, we have some pre-course refreshers that are like crash courses, a day in statistics and a day in, you know, Python, to kind of remind you, oh yeah, that's an if statement and that's a for loop and that kind of thing. But then we also, the coding exercises that we have are kind of like Mad Libs almost, where it's like fill in the blank and you go through it together. So you don't have to do all the loading of the packages and like really start from a blank document that's just staring you in the face. And then there's two other things that we want to do to make this maximally accessible that I think are really important. So one is that we have the kind of core basic thing that you want to get through, that everybody should get through. And then we have like the advanced, you know, challenge part as well, which is for more advanced people so that you don't get bored and you really feel like you're kind of sinking your teeth into it. And then we also say, you know what, you're not going to get this in a day. Like one day is not enough to learn how to do reinforcement learning. It's just not. But we're going to throw it at you. It's going to be a fire hose. You're going to be a sponge. You're going to soak up some of it. And then it's a library, a toolbox that you're building so you can come back to it later. And that's okay. That if you don't understand everything, that's totally fine. And so trying to instill that understanding is also a really important piece, I think.
Okay, thanks. I have actually a comment on that. My feeling is that really what we need are full-fledged courses or programs. It's like, you know, when I think about, you know, my training in physics, I mean, I remember the first 2 years were quite messy. And I mean, they're teaching you something, and then you don't know why the hell do you have to learn this? And then, you know, at the third and fourth year, say, aha, okay, so this is why we had this thing at the first year, because otherwise you cannot do this and that. And the only way to achieve that is really when you spend, you know, several years studying something, right? And my feeling is that, you know, we really need this type of program. So for instance, here in Warsaw, we have a program in neuroinformatics, which I think is achieving quite a lot. But this is a program within physics. And the point is that I think we need such courses, such programs within biology departments. So I once had a student who had double masters in biology and in this neuroinformatics. And that was one of the best people that I ever worked with, because he actually, you know, could understand both things. I mean, he could understand the biology and he would understand, you know, the other part. This is to me the question, how do we achieve this? But, you know, within biology departments, we have the program where you actually have the time to sink your teeth in, like you said. That, you know, you know that, okay, you don't catch this within a day, but you have, you know, 3 full years, you know, before you end up with the bachelor's. And, you know electrophysiology, you know, I don't know, cell cultures, but you can also program and, you know, what is for what. That's a challenge to me.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think you have to tell students why they need to learn something. And, you like can't start your like class with just like, here's a bunch of linear algebra and trust me, it's going to come into like hand later, right?
Exactly.
It doesn't work.
Just
Instead,
wait 3 years and there you are.
Exactly. Yeah. And instead it's like, okay, here's an image. We want to segment the nuclei in this image. How are we going to do it? Oh, guess what? Like we need matrix multiplication to be able to like, you know, get the contrast, whatever it is. Right. So like, that's something you have to do, is start with the problem and then talk about the tools to address the problem.
Yeah, exactly. In a way, that's what Mateusz has been doing in his courses, I think. But anyway, let's move on. Simple question. How do you become a Neuromatch TA? What is required? It's for you again, I guess.
Great question. I'll answer super fast. So you need to have a base core understanding in the materials that are taught. Again, if you've never seen an if statement, probably not the right place for you. If you've never talked about a neuron, probably not the right place for you. But if you have good programming skills and good computational background and good neuroscience background, you can submit a like 4-minute video that's you teaching, I think it's ridge regression is the topic this year. So you show us how you can teach ridge regression in a few minutes, and you submit essentially a CV and a statement of why you want to be a Neuromatch TA. And then we'll go through them and we will select as many as we possibly can based on the number of students who are interested and the number of funding dollars that we have been able to raise this year. So that's it.
Sounds
and feel
good.
free to reach out to Neuromatch on Twitter if you have more questions about that too.
Thank you so much. So now I'll throw one at Mateusz. Mateusz, how many people were in your initial group before it got funding and were able to go back for funding? How did you get the first people interested and how much of your time is involved in running this? I think gaining and keeping momentum is hard.
Yes, it's hard. So before it was me for a year, I guess, only myself. Then I think I managed to interest like 3-4 people, and these were basically the people who took part in the workshops that I organized. So yeah, so they started to help me, and they also started to teach some stuff as well. And then yeah, so that's how I got people interested actually. And then how much time? Yes, a lot. At least a few hours a week now, like but then sometimes it's more, like it's getting more and more because we are organizing for now like workshop or 2 workshops a month, and we have those 2 schools, so now it's more than that, but it's manageable anyway. And if you can delegate work, you can do it very well. I cannot do that, so but there are people who can, that's for sure. And then yes, gaining momentum was quite hard. So we developed a bit. So I found some people, and then it like dispersed a bit. So it were like few attempts to like expand the project that failed. But then finally, now I think it's running very smoothly and well, and more people are interested in joining. So yeah, but it takes years. So that's of course a problem with that. But
so Mateusz, 2 questions to you. Has it slowed down your thesis project? And the second is it worth it?
I don't know. Like it's hard to say because like my project is like based on the fact like I'm more or less setting up everything by myself in my project, so it takes a lot of time in general. So I don't know if it would be faster or not without that project. I think it sped up my project because I learned a lot, and I learned many things that actually helped me to
very good
proceed. So I think it sped up my project, in fact. And what was the second question actually?
Was it worth it? The amount of time, but was it worth it? I mean, the amount of time is spent.
Yeah. I think in a way it might turn out it was the most important thing I did in general. So like you never know if your research will be useful or make any sense in the future, but this is the thing that was done and made sense, and people were trained and will influence the work they do. So it might be that it's the most important part of what I do in general.
Words of wisdom.
So yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I want to move more into training. Okay, Ashley, thinking of what you said at the beginning, which level is best to have this training? Final year undergraduate, specific master's, doctoral, or all researchers across the university?
I think whenever you can. I mean, I think
whenever you can.
I think getting at least exposure as an undergraduate is really useful because it'll tell you whether or not you maybe want to do this for your career, and knowing how to code, knowing a little bit of quantitative skills, like can open up a lot of doors. So I think getting exposure as an undergraduate is great, but whenever you can. I don't think there's like a single answer to this question.
All right. What are some things you recommend universities start doing in graduate neuroscience programs? Should we hire someone who just gives workshops? Do we need to make statistics mandatory, which never cover enough detail for a grad student who needs to know coding, math, qualitative and quantitative stats? Or is it better to have postdoc students teach their own labs? Anyone? Ashley?
I mean, I think minimally make it included as an elective. And I would even like consider that programs give credit for doing things like NMA. Like you get an NMA certificate, maybe that actually counts, right? Like I don't believe everybody should like rework the wheel at their own university. There's some really great curricula out there. So there's NMA, there's software carpentries also, where you can collaborate with them. So you don't need to like bring someone else new, instead give credits to students for doing stuff outside of the university.
Oh. I don't know how to do this, but my feeling is, I mean, I think that really in biology, we have to understand that there's no way forward without having some of those skills. I mean, my feeling is that just like, I know that local biology department, they require a little bit of math and statistics, but I think that programming should be a must. And my feeling is that actually the students, most of the students realize this. It's just a problem with the faculty, to convince the faculty that their students need that.
I'll add to that and say I totally agree with Daniel that statistics and programming, like one semester in each, ought to be mandatory in any of the fields that we're talking about today. And yes, it'd be great if programs like Neuromatch Academy would be able to provide course credit, and we're working towards that. And there are actually some universities that are starting to do that, which is really super cool, but it's university by university. But there's no replacement, I think, for like a statistics core, like an entire semester or an entire year of like actually learn how to do this right instead of just a crash course. And so I think it's absolutely fundamental to not just produce good research, but to understand where your research fits in the broader global community and the current scientific paradigm. I think it's absolutely critical.
Okay, so we have one more of a comment than a question. I think that is difficult for the faculty to get this, and I agree. Okay, so we got the question from Ariel Ipor, and we are going to be wrapping up with this. So I'll take this question and then final comments from the panelists. Okay. So Mateusz, I find amazing that you are using Deep Lab Cat. On my side, I find it very difficult to make use of the output detection for the analysis without additional computer vision tools like OpenCV. How do you approach this? And is this part of the summer course?
So yes, it will be a part of the summer school course. So I encourage you, to join. And if you have like, maybe it's not the good place to answer, but if you would like to have an answer for the question, you can actually write to me, and I will also refer you to my colleague who knows basically everything about Deep Lab Cat. So I would be happy to help. So you can write to me. I guess my email was on I can write it on the. Oh, I will write it actually in the answer to a question. So
okay, thank you so much. Okay, guys. So thank you so much. I mean, that was very interesting, and I'm so grateful, especially to Ashley and to Megan, who had to get up so early because of this idea, but also to Thomas and Mateusz for joining us. So, do you guys have any final comments? The future of neuroscience programming. Okay, that's enough. Okay, guys, thank you so much
for organizing this.
It was fun.
I learned a lot. Thanks to all of the speakers. This was really informative.
I'm going to watch it again actually when I don't have to watch the time, just to get some nice links. And I'm going to read your book actually. I mean, it's coming already. So thanks for that. Okay, guys, have a good day and stay safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.